هدانا إلى الصراط المستقيم والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الأمين وعلى آله الطاهرين وأصحابه الكاملين أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنا نحن نزلنا الذكر وإنا له لحافظون صدق الله العظيم وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم خيركم من تعلم القرآن وعلمه وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم العلماء ورثة الأنبياء. A long time ago, there was a man called Thabit. Thabit rahmatullah alayhi was a very pious individual, very ascetic, very God-fearing. Once Thabit, he was doing wudu near a stream. Upon doing wudu, he came across an apple which had fallen. So naturally he had a bite of this apple and he spat it out immediately. When he spat this apple out, there was blood mixed in the apple. Thabit, who was God-fearing, muttaqi, a zahid individual, realized that there was something wrong with what he had done. Does anybody know what would he have done wrong by eating this apple? Without permission, very good. So he realized that this apple, he was not the owner. So a God-fearing person naturally would feel, maine kuch galat kiya. So he followed the stream until he came to an apple tree. Near the apple tree, he came to the owner of the apple tree. And he asked him, said, is this apple tree yours? The man says, yes. So Thabit rahmatullah alayhi, he says to him, by mistake, I had eaten this apple and I want to recompense. Whatever the cost is, I will pay you. So the man was astonished and amazed at this young man's piety and taqwa and God consciousness. And he said to him, whether you give me 1 dinar, dirham, 100 dinar or dirhams or 1,000, you will not redeem for this apple. There is only one way you can redeem yourself, is by marrying my daughter. Because he looked at his piety. And there's many lessons which we can take just from this story, but time is less. One of the lessons is, which is in hadith, that when you see a person who has deen, religion, piety, then you should marry him, and that's what this man did. So Thabit rahmatullah alayhi marries his daughter, and they had a boy, a baby son, who they named Nu'man ibn Thabit, who later became Imam al-A'zam, Imam al-Mashriq wal-Maghrib, Siraj al-Aimma, who we know today as Imam Abu Hanifah rahmatullahi alayhi. Everybody say rahmatullahi alayhi. Time is short. There are many stories on the piety, the knowledge of Imam Abu Hanifah rahmatullahi alayhi, the virtues of Imam Abu Hanifah rahmatullahi alayhi. We'll start with, I mentioned one of his titles was Imam al-Mashriq wal-Maghrib. And this isn't just a title out of exaggeration or mubalagha. Imam Abdullah ibn Mubarak rahmatullahi alayhi, he used to say that I would be sitting in Makkah, in Haram Sharif, and I would see a man, Imam Abu Hanifah rahmatullahi alayhi, people would come to him from the east, from the west, the young and the old, the rich and the poor, the scholars and the kings. Everybody would be asking this man questions, fatawas and maslas. Hence he is Imam al-Mashriqi wal-Maghrib. So we don't just say that. He had many students, hundreds and thousands of students who weren't ordinary students. Imam Abu Hanifa's students and the scholars he produced were also great. Imam Abu Hanifa's virtues are endless, but the scholars he produced and the students, many of them were Hafidul Hadith. Does anybody know what do we call a Hafidul Hadith? A person who's memorized Hadith, 100,000 Hadith. These were his students. These were the scholars Imam Abu Hanifa produced. So imagine his virtue. So it's very important we understand, like mashallah Mufti Ismail said, the importance following madhab, and the madhab we follow is the Hanafi madhab. I'm assuming the majority, if not everybody sitting here, majority listening, will be following the Hanafi madhab. And we say about all the Imams, they are great, all the madhabs. But today, inshallah, we will go through the virtues of Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi. A poet says, لأبي حنيفة في العلوم منار ملئت به الآفاق والأخطار. That Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayhi, he was like a lantern, a lighthouse. He was a guidance, and he guided many hundreds and thousands of people at his time. If we were to enumerate his followers, surely it would be in the billions. Not millions, in billions. And this is why people who object on Imam Sahib and say Imam Sahib only knew few hadith, 17 is normally narrated. So sometimes we answer and say, even if he knew 17, let's say we believe you, today half of the ummah or more follow him just by 17 hadith. Just by 17 hadith, even though that's not true. So Imam Sahib had many virtues. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had blessed him. And even in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ mentions about the men and people of Persia. لَوْ كَانَ الْعِلْمُ مُعَلَّكُمْ بِالثُّرَيَّا لَتَنَالَهُ الرِّجَالِ مِنْ أَبْنَاءِ الْفَارِسِ. Now the Prophet ﷺ mentions that if knowledge was suspended or hanging on the star of Thuraya, then the people and the sons of Faris would have sought it out. Meaning, Thuraya is a star hundreds and thousands of miles away. That the Prophet ﷺ here, he's explaining the virtues and capability of the people of Persia. Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayh is from Persia. His father, we mentioned earlier, Thabit rahmatullah alayh, was of Persian descent. I also forgot to mention at the start about Thabit rahmatullahi alayh. He had taken the dua of Ali radiallahu anhu. Ali radiallahu anhu made dua for Thabit, the father of Imam Abu Hanifa, and his progeny. So maybe it was through this dua and the dua of many Sahaba and Tabi'in, Imam Abu Hanifa's status is what we see today. Imam Sahib memorized the Quran at a very young age, and then he went into business with his father. His father was a silk trader. Once they were going to the marketplace, and Imam Sha'bi rahmatullahi alayh from afar sees Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayh as a young man. He's still a young man. And he says to him, when he went closer, he actually thought he was one of his students. Yeah, sometimes people say that all Maulvis look the same. So maybe he thought it was actually one of his students. Going closer, he realized it's not his student. So he went up to him and he said, young man, where are you going? He said, I'm going to the marketplace. He said, do you sit in the majalis of ulama? And he said, not really. I don't spend much time with ulama. I don't spend much time seeking knowledge. So Imam Shabi rahmatullah alayh said to him, by seeing you, I can see that you are a young man full of wisdom and intelligence. Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayh says, these words changed my life and it permeated in my heart. Thereafter I started seeking knowledge and sitting in the majlis of ulama. The first thing Imam Sahib was seeking was usul of deen. Very important. And now many people again object that he over deliberated and sometimes a lot of what he talked about was just kalam. And this isn't true. We look that in Kufa where Imam Sahib was, it was a very dynamic place. They had people from all sorts of sects, and there were many deviant sects. Many as in every day, every week, there was a new deviant sect. So one of the stories we learn is that Imam Abu Hanifa's neighbor, he was a Shia. He was a Shia who had 2 donkeys. Many of you may have heard this. It's a bit of a joke as well. So his 2 donkeys, the Shia, he named one Abu Bakr and one Umar. One day, one of the donkeys got very angry and kicked the owner in the head, as a result of which he died. Somebody came to Imam Sahib and told him the story of his neighbor. So Imam Sahib smiled and said, go and check which donkey kicked, and I guarantee you that it will be Umar. As we know, Umar radiallahu anhu was very angry, so he ended up killing the Shia for naming such people. These are just some of the stories at the time of Imam Abu Hanifa, that there were many deviant sects, but none of them would challenge or debate Imam Abu Hanifa. Not the Mu'tazilis, not the Qadiriyah, and not even the atheists. They would be scared to debate with Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayh because of his knowledge and wisdom. Once the governor of Kufa, he organized a debate. It was a very big debate. Thousands of atheists, not just 1 or 2, thousands of atheists against Imam Abu Hanifa. So they've gathered in the place, the hall, wherever it was, and then Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah has not turned up. He's late. So eventually when Imam Sahib turns up, the atheists were very angry and annoyed that he'd made them wait. Now again, it's a bit of a joke in it that Maulvis are always late. So if he was one of us, he probably would have said Indian timing, Pakistani timing. But Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah had an amazing story, and he actually said to the people, listen to why I'm late. You know where I live? There's a river. And usually there's a bridge that crosses this river. And today there was no bridge. But all of a sudden, miraculously, when I was waiting at the river, trees automatically uprooted, chopped themselves into planks, iron came out from the river, formed into nails, and the planks came together and formed a boat. I sat in the boat, and miraculously this boat rowed itself across the river, hence I was delayed. What do you think the atheists said? They laughed. And they said, what's this hocus pocus you're telling us? This is nonsense. You expect us to believe this? Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayhi said, debate over, everybody go home. Debate over, everybody go home. So the atheists were dumbfounded and said, what do you mean? So they said, just like you don't believe in a God and a creator, and you think the creation of the world came together with a big bang, or came together itself, and if you believe that, then why can't you believe a very small boat rowed me across the river and I came? And the people understood. This was the intelligence and wisdom of Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayh. By the age of 20, a very young age, which many of us start studying, or just before that we start studying, he had one of the largest halakas in the masjid of Kufa. Once during his halakah, a woman came up to him with a masla of talaq, a divorce masla. So Imam Abu Hanifa was still quite young, 20 years old. So he referred this lady to a faqih of that time, Hamad ibn Sulaiman. He said, go to him, ask him this masla, and then come back to me. So the lady goes to Hamad ibn Sulaiman and she asks him the masla. He gives the answer, and the lady comes back to Imam Abu Hanifa. Imam Abu Hanifa, upon hearing this answer, realized shortcomings in his own knowledge. He realized what he was doing is not the whole entire science of knowledge. There were many things he didn't know, and there were teachers who were greater than him living in Kufa. Imam Abu Hanifa at that very point picked up his shoes. He entered the halaqah of Hamad ibn Sulaiman rahmatullahi alayh, and he sat with him at his feet, humbly learning knowledge until Hamad ibn Sulaiman passed away. And this is also a lesson for every student of knowledge, including myself. The deen is very vast. Yeah, many of us sitting here, mashallah, there's ulama here, hufad kiram here, there'll be other people of the community who have studied. Little or large, we have studied. It's not the be-all and the end-all. Yeah, every single one of us, we are taught in Darul Ulum or a madrasa, sisters listening, alima class. This is just a training ground. It's just a training ground. 5, 6, 7 years you spend in a madrasa does not make you faqihus zaman. Does not make you even equal to the dust of Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayh. Sadly, many of us, and especially people we see online today, which is even worse. I don't want to go into that, otherwise time will finish. But online is the copy-paste zamana, copy-paste apps. And they don't sit at any scholar's feet. Here, Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayh, a great scholar of the time, immediately went to Hamad ibn Sulaiman rahmatullah alayh and stayed with him till his death. There is a famous quote, and this is also a big matter of adab and respect and etiquette for our teachers. Anybody who is your teacher, whether they taught you Alif Bata or Bukhari and Muslim, Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah was famously known to say that I would never pray salah except I would pray for my parents and Hamad ibn Sulaiman. He would pray for his ustad after every salah. Further, look how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed Imam Sahib with great students. Imam Abu Yusuf rahmatullahi alayh, he used to say after the death of Imam Abu Hanifa that every salah I prayed, I would make dua for Abu Hanifa first, then my parents. So he went a level up. He would make dua for Imam Abu Hanifa first, then his parents. This was destiny manifesting itself. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was showing Imam Sahib and his students that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had destined Imam Sahib to codify and uniform the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which was later manifested in a dream. A dream which many of you will have heard. Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi, once he dreamt that he was digging the grave of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's grave was being dug, and when he opened it, there was bones scattered. And Imam Abu Hanifa was putting them in order. So this dream was then sent to the interpreter at the time, Imam ibn Sirin rahmatullah alayhi, a name I'm sure you all have heard. He's got a famous book on dreams and interpretation. So Imam Abu Hanifa sent one of his students and said, ask Imam ibn Sirin, what is the meaning and interpretation of this dream? And it was pretty simple. Imam ibn Sirin said, this person will codify and uniform the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and this is why today we have the Hanafi madhab. Another point to make here about Hamad ibn Sulaiman, he died in 120 Hijri. Imam Abu Hanifa was 40 years old. only 40. Until then, Imam Abu Hanifa did not have his own halaqah or dars because of his ustad. Out of the respect for the ustad, he did not start any halaqah. This is a lesson today for every one of us, especially mashallah today we see many young today is to me teenagers, 17, 18, 19-year-olds graduating from Darul Uloom, whether it's Darul Uloom, Karachi, Bin Nori, Deoband. It doesn't mean that you've graduated, you are Shaykhul Islam. Look at Imam Abu Hanifa, 40 years old. 40 years old, out of the respect of his ustad, that there is somebody greater than me, did not start his own dars and halaqah. So it's a lesson for us that today I understand it's very easy, online, offline, open something, and many people do it without the mashwara of their own ustads. But this is another point very important to mention, that age and maturity is very important. MashaAllah, it's very good that a person graduates, and alimas especially. I don't know how it's in Burnley Nelson, but in Blackburn, mashallah, we have wholesale. We have wholesale of alimas upon alimas, hundreds on the conveyor belt. But we have to look at the quality of these alimas, and what are they actually doing? Is it actually a good thing, making them alims and alimas at such young age? That's a debate, inshallah, which the ulama will have. Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah had 4,000 teachers. So back to what I said, it's not just graduating, getting your sanad and thinking you're Shaykhul Islam, put a turban on and you look like Ibn Sina or something. It's not about just the look. 4,000 teachers, 7 of which were Sahaba Ridwanullahi Majma'een. 7. 93 Tabi'in, and the rest were Tabi Tabi'in. This is Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayh, who lived in the time in Kufa. At that time, the Darul Khilafah was Kufa. So there were many Sahaba living there. In total, 1,500 Sahaba, some of which were very eminent Sahaba. 24 of Ahl Badr, the likes of Ali radiallahu anhu, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, Salman Farsi, Ammar ibn Yasir, and Abu Musa Ash'ari. So there were many great Sahabas living at that time. Imam Abu Hanifa then also lived 6 years in Makkah. And why I mentioned this point, I'll come on to later, that obviously he was in the greatest city, and many people who object on him, inshallah we will come on to this point later. 15 times Imam Abu Hanifa performed Hajj, and every time he performed Hajj, it was about seeking knowledge. MashaAllah, Hajj is a big ibadah, a pillar of Islam, but he didn't hesitate to learn knowledge from people who are coming at that time as well. Let's look at Imam Abu Hanifa's piety and his zuhd. Abdullah ibn Mubarak rahmatullah alayhi says, I asked the people of Kufa, who is the greatest faqih in Kufa? And they would say, Imam Abu Hanifa. Then he would ask, who is the greatest zahid? Zahid is a person, an ascetic person, who doesn't care about the dunya, who's not after money, name and fame, or in this day and age we might say likes and comments and followers. He's not after that. He does things solely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, very sincerely. So who was the greatest zahid in Kufa at that time? Imam Abdullah ibn Mubarak says the answer given was Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi. So it's not always about knowledge. Shaitan had knowledge. It's a famous line I always say to myself. Sometimes, we learn a few hadith, we know a few stories, we memorize a few books. It's not about memorizing books. The main thing is amal and preaching it. So Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi was not just a man of fiqh and hadith and knowledge, he also had piety, which I think is very important in this day and age, probably more important than knowledge. Knowledge is on your fingertips. Piety isn't. Piety, you have to embed it into your life. You can't put a USB and learn piety. You can get hadith. You can't learn piety off YouTube. You have to sit in the majlis of ulama. A quick story, inshallah. Imam ibn Shaqiq rahmatullah alayhi says, once Imam Sahib, he was walking on the road and he noticed a man coming towards him. This man, getting closer to Imam Sahib, immediately crossed the road and started to turn his back. So Imam Sahib felt something sketchy was going on. So he crossed the road, met this person and said, Assalamu alaikum, wa alaikum salam, everything okay? So he said, do you not remember me? You lent me 10,000 dirhams, and currently times are very hard for me. I'm unemployed, I'm not working, so I can't pay you back. So when I saw you, I thought you were going to ask me for the money, hence I turned my back. Imam Sahib, a humble man of piety, he was very upset hearing this and said, is this what it's become? Is this what it's become, that you don't even want to do salam to me? And then he raised his finger and said, testify, I bear witness on Allah that I have forgiven you. Your 10,000 dirhams, you do not need to pay me back. Imam Abu Hanifa had a lot of money. He was a rich man, but he gave it all for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Once his student enters his house, and there was barely anything there, just a mattress and a bit of food. But he would have money. It would not stay with him. He would give it away. And this is the lesson for ulama as well. That I mentioned at the start that he was in business with his father who was a merchant. I know it's hard and it's easy to say, but ulama in this day and age, it's very good to have your own trade, a business where you can do. This is a sunnah of all the ulama haqq of the past. That's why they could sit on the mimbar and say the deen without filters, without committee pressure, without this ulama will have a fatwa against me. The problem we have in today's day and age sadly with ulama is we are under the payroll. So I have to be careful. I have to get my khutbahs and bayans according to not the government's guidelines, the committee's guidelines. So it's very important for ulama to be independent, like all the imams, not just Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah, many of them. Let's look at Imam Abu Hanifa's taqwa. Ja'far ibn Abi rahmatullah alayhi used to say, and this subhanallah is very important for myself and everybody listening, my ears are closest to my mouth, that somebody asks us questions. Obviously we've got smartphones, mobile phones, online. When Imam Abu Hanifa was asked a question, he would sweat like a river. This is the narration, Ja'far ibn Rabi. He would sweat like a river. Why? Why? He didn't have the knowledge to answer, he was scared. There was no artificial intelligence in them days. So he was worried, where am I going to get the answer from? Why would the Imam Sahib sweat? Nobody knows, because you're not sweating and I'm not sweating. That's exactly the answer. We don't sweat, do we? Fatafat jawab de dete hai, sahi galat makruh bidat koi baat nahi. Allahu Akbar, my brothers, he would sweat to the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That am I giving the correct answer? When I heard this and read this ayat, subhanallah, it made me think myself. You know how we answer questions, and that's why I say we have smartphone and boom 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 work out 15 answers a day. But Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayhi would fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's also mentioned that he had a shura of his own students, 40 students. Yeah? Sometimes they would have deliberation on one question for a whole month. On one masla, fatwa. Back to, it's not about Google and artificial intelligence and this app and that app. Jawab de diya. 1 month Imam Abu Hanifa and his students. After that Imam Sahib would stand up and say, listen carefully, because of my sins we are unable to come to a solution. Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah would say, because of my sins we are unable to come to a solution. He would pray 2 rakats and beg Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and make dua to him for one mas'ala. Sochne ki baat hai. Upon this story, Fudail bin Ayad rahmatullahi alayh, a name we've all heard, a very pious individual known as Abidul Haramain, the worshipper of both harams. Why was he called that? Because it's famously said about Fudail bin Ayad rahmatullahi alayh that there is not a single place in the haram at that time, not the huge haram today, at that time there's not a single place in the Haram Sharif where Fudail bin Ayad didn't shed tears. Hence he was known as Abidul Haramain. He would say upon hearing this that Imam Abu Hanifa was such a great individual, he would have very few sins to do tawbah from. Very few sins to do tawbah from. My dear respected brothers and sisters, we need to think. Such a great Imam would blame a block in knowledge, not coming to solutions, on himself, the darkness of his heart and his piety and sins, but he only had a few sins. You could probably count them on his fingers. You and I, Allah knows best. You and I, we know best our level of sinning and piety. But when it comes to knowledge, how quick are we? The social media scholars, the armchair critics, this debate, that debate, halal and haram. Just think of all of this in context of social media, where we have come and strayed away from true Quran and Sunnah. Think about all the debates you've seen. Everybody's seen one debate, whether it's Facebook, WhatsApp, groups. I've seen dozens of debates, yeah? And most of these are people who don't have knowledge. And then compare it just to this fact of Imam Abu Hanifa, that 1 month on one masla. In my opinion, it is this. I'jabu kulli dhi ra'yin ra'yahu, sign of Qiyamah, isn't it? Opinionated. Opinionated, whether it's a scholar or a non-scholar. Even scholars, we need to be reminded. Imam Abu Hanifa was a scholar. So we are so opinionated in my view. Kehte hai na, when scholars usually come from India, Pakistan, they say England mein har ghar mein mufti hai. Everybody has a view. And we won't even come on to the next part where they talk about the women and their views. because that will probably take till Fajr. But what they usually say is, Har ghar mein mufti hai yahan par. You know, they ask us, lekin khud jawab dete hai. Brothers and sisters, we need a bit of humility. I think it comes down to, in England, one quality: humility. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all. The last thing I'm going to mention, inshallah, is that many people who object on Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayh, people who object even say that he uses weak hadith, or what I mentioned earlier, 17 hadith, and what I mentioned, some people even say his salah was weak. So the answer, Imam Waqi ibn Jarrah rahmatullah alayh, who was the ustad of Imam Shafi, someone asked him once that Imam Abu Hanifa, you know, he's good, but he makes a lot of mistakes. He makes a lot of mistakes. And Imam Waqi ibn Jarrah replied, not with Imam Sahib's virtues, he said, look at the greatness and knowledge of excellence of his students, the likes of Imam Abu Yusuf rahmatullah alayh, Imam Muhammad rahmatullah alayh, Imam Zufar rahmatullah alayh. Because look at his students, they're so great. And the second point he mentioned, that he lived in a time where there were many great scholars. I mentioned he lived in Makkah. So if Imam Abu Hanifa was making great mistakes, let's say, every human makes mistakes, but he was making major mistakes, surely the likes of Abdullah ibn Mubarak rahmatullah would have criticized him. Surely the likes of Fudail bin Iyad rahmatullah would have criticized him. Imam Malik rahmatullah would have criticized him. So it's very important, with such a great Imam, whether it's somebody online, offline, we are very careful with our tongues. And I'm going to mention, and finishing off inshallah, just concluding, Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah, when he passed away, it was due to an issue he had with the governor at the time. He was whipped, and when they were whipping him, he died in sajda. Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah, he died in sajda. Hundreds and thousands of people attended his janazah. After the janazah, somebody saw Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah in a dream. Inshallah, we're finishing on this. Somebody saw Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah in a dream. So remember how he passed away in sujood after being whipped. And this is the stance of the ulama of the past. Many of them sacrificed their lives. They would not give in to the governor, Khalif at the time. Afzalul jihad man qala kalimat haqqin in the sultan in jahid. When somebody saw him, and they saw him in a very beautiful state, they said, "Oh Imam Sahib, how did you get such a great status in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?" Listen very carefully. It wasn't his knowledge. It wasn't his piety. It wasn't his salah and qiyamul layl. He said, thanks to the people who accused me and criticized me, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has raised my status. And this is why some ulama say that we have people today who even criticize the Sahaba. We have people who criticize the Sahaba. So why doesn't Allah deal with them? Yeah, the British youngster who has average mind will say, if Allah is so great, He should deal with them, send azab on them. But the ulama say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to elevate their status in the hereafter. So it's a lesson for all of us, even though ulama, mashallah, many ulama sitting here who do good work. If you are criticized, people speak against you, will even write fatwas and websites against you, as long as you are sincere and on haqq. Imam Abu Hanifa's example is a great example. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to follow the likes of Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayh. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to live for Allah, die for Allah, and from today to our last breath we spend in seeking knowledge. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen.